speaker is a very curious man. When he gets up in the morning, the first thought that comes to his mind is, what's next? Why? Well, Mark Stevenson is a writer, a deep thinker, and a stand-up comedian. To get the answers, he traveled the globe. He talked with scientists, philosophers, politicians, anyone who could bring him insights about how technology will change, how society will change. His voyage of discovery took him to Oxford to meet transhumanists, to Boston, where he confronted a robot with mood swings, and to an underwater cabinet, meeting in the Indian Ocean. It's all in his book, An Optimist's Tour of the Future. Where will we be when we grow up? And why doesn't it have to be scary? Because he believes that we can have a real renaissance. Mark Stevenson.
Yes? Hello? 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 We're going to do this one more time. Hello? Brilliant. Okay, good evening. The first thing, before I get into my talk, I just have to say I'm in love with Belgium. I'm literally in love with your country. It's so beautiful here in Ghent, and you serve champagne and do gambling at lunch in a marketing conference. I mean, I'm literally terrified to go to the after-conference drinks because, you know, what happens there? I mean, I didn't bring my fetish gear, you know. It's also incredibly intimidating to be following the Belgian version of Tom Cruise. Who makes beer? So I'm in love with your country. Now, I have to tell you that I'm no longer a stand-up comedian. My job now is a bit more serious, so that's as funny as it gets. My talk starts with a quote from this man. This is William Gibson. He's a very famous science fiction writer, but a very prescient thinker about the future. And the most famous quote in futurology is this one. The future is all around us, it's just not evenly distributed yet. Now, William Gibson said that in 1994, and what he meant was there were lots of things going on in laboratories and at the cutting edge of science and technology, but they would take a long time to get to you and me. But that statement is becoming increasingly false, because as we've already discussed at this conference, the future is coming at us ever quicker. And that's going to have a massive implication for you and your business and your families. And if you do not pay attention, you will lose your job. And if you do pay attention, you may do something incredible. So people call me a futurologist, and I don't really like that term, because nobody's really been able to define it for me. It seems that the only qualification for being a futurologist is you write something with the word future in the title, which is this is what I did, and it's just come out now in Dutch with a different title. So my advice to you, if you want a whole new area of your CV, is write something with the word future in it, and you can legitimately call yourself a futurologist at any future interviews. What I actually do is I spend most of my time looking at what's happening at the cutting edge of technology, megatrends in demographics, in population, how we're organizing ourselves, and hopefully allow my clients and the people I work with to ask better questions about where they're going. And I work with everybody from school children to corporations to investors and billionaires. These are some of the people that I've been asked to work for. I have to say that it turns out I'm exactly the wrong person to speak to you. I did the test online. It turns out I'm not very optimistic at all. So sorry about that. And for a while, just so you trust me a bit, I used to be a marketing director of a big transactions company, although I got fired. And the reason I got fired was because my boss came to me and he said, Mark, the quality of your work is excellent, but you just don't give a shit, do you? And I said, no, not really. And he said, I don't want anybody working for my company who doesn't believe in it, which is why it's so inspiring to hear the message we've just heard about authenticity, and that's been mentioned a number of times today. I'm going to talk about how you hold on to that as we move into the future. Because I'm here to tell you that we are in the middle of a shift. A huge shift, a shift as big as the one that took us from subsistence to agriculture, or the one that took us from agriculture to industrialism. This shift in the age we're going into, we do not even have a name for it yet. So some people call it the information age. But really, information is just one part of what we're changing our relationship with. So yes, we have changed our relationship with information, and we will continue to do so. But we're going to change our relationship with many more fundamental things. Energy, matter, time, our morals, and the very definition of what it means to be human. And if you understand those changes, you will have a chance to prosper. And if you do not, you will struggle. So you cannot have failed to notice right now, at this point in history, that most of our institutions are failing us. The government doesn't work anymore. In fact, here I think you had a government, you didn't have a government for quite a long time, which is very admirable and well done. We were very proud of you and the rest of Europe, because we'd really like to have the same situation. But the government doesn't really serve us anymore. The education system is no longer fit for purpose. The financial system is a joke. The legal system is, don't get me started. And now, a popular analysis of why that is that it is incompetence of the people in power. And whilst incompetence in government is not a headline, it's not actually the reason. The crises that we see around us have much more fundamental roots, and the roots are in this shift and where we're going. Now, to understand where we're going, I'm going to take you right back to where we've come from, because it's important to see the context. So, our story starts 15 billion years ago with the Big Bang. Just for the geeks in the audience, I know that is not an actual picture of the Big Bang. I have had people come up to me and say, you know that's only a representation of the Big Bang, don't you? Are you single? 15 billion years ago, the universe pops into existence. And over a period of several billion years, we get galaxies forming in star clusters, and then in one of those star clusters, we have our solar system, and the Earth begins to form. Several more billion years pass, and the Earth is full of fiery, primordial oceans. And in those oceans are these molecules called amino acids. And these are the very building blocks of life. Every protein in your cells is made from amino acids. And slowly, over many, many millions of years, these amino acids arrange themselves somehow into these magical machines called cells, of which there are hundreds of millions in every one of you. And inside nearly every single one of your cells is an incredible molecule. Of course, I'm talking about DNA, a molecule that can store and transmit the very code of life, the instructions to make everything that's living on this planet. It's biology's paper. And then slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, these cells begin to organize themselves and hang out with each other until we get simple organisms. This is what a biologist would call a simple multicellular organism, which is, again, why most biologists are single. And over many millions of years, these cells start to hang out in more complex arrangements until we get complex multicellular organisms like this. And then a very, very extraordinary thing happens, which is these creatures start to form societies. So we've gone from cells hanging out together to creatures hanging out together. This is really where Facebook starts. Then the organisms get ever more complex until we have things like this and things like this. Now, I can guarantee that if you were, or any of you were under the age of 12, you would have gone, ah, at that point. So can we just, because that's cute. Okay? Thank you. Oh, you're nice. I love Belgium. It's great. The creatures get ever more complex until eventually we get to this creature on your far right. Homo sapiens sapiens, you and me. And inside this creature's head is a collection of cells that look like this. And this gives rise to a whole new kind of evolution. Cultural evolution, the evolution of our society through ideas and technology and trade until you get Shakespeare and Shanghai and Shakira and shampoo and shovels and share trading. And here we all are. Now, the problem we have is that we tend to think that this process is over. From our frame of reference, we tend to think, well, you know, that was stuff we studied about the past and it's over now. Which is fine if you want to imagine that Mitt Romney is the pinnacle of God's plan. So it's not over. Of course it's not over. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what's going to come next. This lucky lady here is called Caitlin McNamara. She's not lucky because she's being kissed by George Bush. That is never a lucky situation for any woman. She's lucky because she's one of the few people to have had 2 bladders. The one she was born with, which caused her all sorts of medical problems, and the one she has now. And the one she has now was grown from her own stem cells, which were taken from her, and in a laboratory, a whole new organ was grown from her own tissue and implanted back into her. No need for a donor, no need for any drugs to deal with the transplant. And she's not the only person who's benefited from this technology. There are many people now walking around the earth with replacement body parts grown from their own tissue. This is Caitlin's doctor. He's called Anthony Atala. He runs the Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine in North Carolina. He's making 22 types of human tissue right now. He's even working on a technique to print the human kidney. You can see the printer blurred in the background there, and what he's holding and showing to this audience is a kidney that he's just printed on it. Now, I like the fact also that Anthony's research institute is in North Carolina, because North Carolina is considered the kind of the dumb state in America. It's the one they joke about. North Carolina is where you can marry your cousin, but not your gay cousin. So we have a stem cell revolution going on. At the same time, we have a genetics revolution going on. So about 10 years ago, Bill Clinton walked into the East Room of the White House, and he announced the creation of what he called the most wondrous map. And what he was talking about was the sequencing of the first complete human genome, the writing down of the code, of the instructions to make a complete human being. That cost $100 million. But now, if you look at this graph, this is a logarithmic graph, you can see what's happening to genome sequencing costs. In fact, I spoke to some people last week from a university in London who believe they can now sequence the complete human genome for $100. So genome sequencing is outstripping Moore's law, which you can see there, that famous law which explains why your mobile phone has more processing power in it than the entire Apollo space program. Genome sequencing is now outstripping that law by a factor of 4. And what that means is that the $1 human genome will be with us by the end of this decade, and the 1 cent human genome will come immediately afterwards. And that will change everything about medicine, because nations will start giving their children their genome sequence at birth, and you can start to have personalized medicines based on your genetics. In fact, the very first drug based on personal genetics for lung cancer patients has just been approved for use in America. So we're moving into an era of personalized medicine. It's not just biotech or biological sciences that are giving us interesting options. This is Robert Af Ekenstam. He was the first recipient of this technology you can see here, Smart Hand. It's a hand that has the same level of dexterity as your hand. It's controlled by his thoughts. It's wired into the nerve endings in the end of his arm. And it returns to him a sense of touch. He says, I can feel my fingers again, which is odd, because I don't have any. Now, I don't want to get the geeks in the audience too excited, but this is the scene from the end of The Empire Strikes Back, where Luke Skywalker gets his hand back. Now, I show Robert because he was the first person to receive that technology. But that technology is looking ever more lifelike and becoming ever more functional. We see how fast technology moves. And so this science fiction image may not be science fiction for long. So I live in London, where we just had the Olympics. You probably saw it over here, I'm guessing. You saw the Olympics? Yes, just checking. It's great if you lived in London because everything worked for like 2 weeks. The tube worked, you know, and everybody was polite to each other. And we had this great sort of cosmopolitan, functioning, fantastic, clean city. And then the Olympics stopped. And now it's like the tube's a disaster and everybody's telling everybody else to fuck off. So it was back to normal. But I asked people, what was your favorite moment of the Olympics? In fact, anybody, what was your favorite moment of the Olympics? Okay, you're not that interested in that sport then, you know. Oh, the Mobot. Okay, so people often talk about Mo Farah, or they'll talk about Usain Bolt in the 100 meters and the 200 meters. My favorite moment was watching this man. Yes, you remember this guy. This is Oscar Pistorius, the Paralympic runner who competed against able-bodied athletes in a final, in an Olympic final. It's an incredible achievement. But if you look at what's happening with bionics, by 2016 or 2020, Oscar or one of his contemporaries will be unbeatable by an able-bodied athlete. And athletics officials are wondering what to do about that. In fact, they say that Oscar has an unfair advantage when it comes to running. So now, being born without legs is an unfair advantage in competitive running. If you want to see our journey and hints of it, watch the Paralympics for the next 3 Olympics. This is where culture will really shift. Because Oscar won't be disabled anymore, he will be enhanced. So, we're changing our relationship with our bodies, which means we'll also change our relationship with time. So, as was mentioned earlier by Philip, we're all living a lot longer. And actually, the pensions industry is a little upset about that. Because originally, when the pensions industry was invented, you were expected to retire at 60 or 65, and you were expected to die quite soon afterwards. And now, we're all living a lot longer. And that's causing a problem. And what happens if we start to live much longer, as technology will allow us to 100, 120, regularly, living more healthily? That technology is coming. What does that do to the pensions industry? What does that do to the concept of work? What does that do to relationships? I mean, my mum said to me the other day, I love your father, but 60 years is a fucking long time. 100 years, 150 years. What about living forever? What about immortality? That sounds like a crazy idea. Except there are immortal creatures that live on this planet right now. I'm going to show you one. This is Tetrahymena. It's a single-celled organism that never ages. So it's not completely immortal, you can still crush it. But if it gets to eat, it will never age and never die. And it does this by controlling a particular enzyme called telomerase, which protects your chromosomes. Now, you will have telomerase in many of your cells, but your level of telomerase drops as you get older, which is one of the reasons we age. Now, using our new skills in biotechnology and genetics, we've been able to work out what this organism does, and we've been able to look at that and use its techniques to reverse aging in some human cell lines. So suddenly the idea of living a lot longer whilst being healthy doesn't look so crazy. So we'll change our relationship with time and with our bodies. And we're also going to change our relationship with energy. All economies are based on access to energy. Every time we go through a big shift, it's how we've changed our relationship with energy. Agriculture was a way for us to harness the sun's energy more efficiently. The Industrial Revolution was when we found even more energy, because we found a big savings account under the earth that Mother Nature put down there for many, many years. And we thought, we'll have that, except we've been spending it like a heroin addict with a credit card. And every time we have access to more energy, society completely changes. When we had agriculture, suddenly there was a surplus. There were things that you could do rather than farm. You could become a lord or an administrator or a tax collector. You could have a state. And then when we had industrialism, again, more energy, so we could afford to do interesting new things, like an education system. So what happens if we change our relationship with energy again? One of my advisory roles is for this. It's called the Virgin Earth Challenge, and it's a prize set up by Richard Branson, $25 million prize for any company that can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in a sustainable way, both environmentally sustainably, so it does no harm, but also commercially sustainably. You have to make a profit while you're doing it to win this prize. We had 10,000 applications for this prize. Has to be said, a lot of those people were crazy. We had 2,600 written applications. Those were narrowed down to 100 applications with real scientific merit. We put them through a very rigorous scientific evaluation process. And we have announced 11 finalists. 11 companies that have the potential to take carbon dioxide out of our air at a gigaton level and make a profit while doing it. I'm going to talk about one of them. This is Klaus. Klaus works at Columbia University in New York. He's from Germany. He's everything you want from a scientist. He speaks with a German accent, and he can't tell jokes. He's just the perfect scientist. But he's brilliant. He's a brilliant, brilliant man, and he's working with this material you can see on your right. And what this does is it absorbs carbon dioxide from the air. You put it in the air, it will saturate with carbon dioxide. That's actually not too hard to do. Carbon is kind of like the slut of chemistry. It will bond with anything. Which is why Mother Nature uses it to make lots of stuff, to make plants. I mean, most of the stuff around us is actually made from carbon because it will bond with lots of other stuff. So getting something to bond with carbon is not hard, but if you want to make this commercially viable, you have to make that material reusable. And that's always been hard to do because you need energy to pull the carbon dioxide back off. So you'd end up using more energy than you saved. You put more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than you took out. But Klaus's material will give carbon dioxide back very cheaply because all you have to do to get the carbon to come off it is spray it with water. Now, it has to be said that Klaus has no idea why, but he is working on it. Now, he has come up with a prototype machine where you put this stuff in the air, it saturates with carbon dioxide, you pull it back into the machine, you spray that stuff with water, and the CO2 will bubble to the top of the machine in the way that bubbles come to the top of the drinks we had at lunch. 100 million of these machines would offset all our global CO2 emissions, which sounds like a lot, except we make between 70 180 million cars every single year. So it's hard, but it's not impossible. And he's just one of 11 finalists. Now, environmentalists say, what are we going to do with that CO2 when we capture it? There's lots of arguments about where we should store it. And at the Virgin Earth Challenge, we don't think you should store it. We think you should do something with it. Carbon's very useful. In an audience of this size, there will almost certainly be several people who suffer from diabetes. And those people get their insulin, which they inject, from a genetically modified bacteria. Back in 1976, when we were just at the beginning of the genetics and biotech revolution, somebody worked out you could reprogram the genetics of an E. coli bacteria to eat sugar and excrete human insulin. Now, before that, most diabetics got their insulin from pigs. And that had problems because sometimes there was a mismatch between the pig insulin and the human recipient. And to be honest, the pigs weren't all that keen on the relationship either. So if you can genetically modify an organism to eat sugar and excrete insulin, what can we do now? Well, there are many laboratories working on this. And now they have succeeded in creating organisms that eat carbon dioxide and excrete crude oil. That's not science fiction. It's exactly what's happening in these ponds in New Mexico. This is an algae that eats CO2 and excretes bio-crude oil. Now, at the moment, this firm is shipping in their CO2 in tankers. They're buying it commercially. And at the Virgin Earth Challenge, we thought it might be a good idea for them to talk to Klaus and some of the other finalists. Because if you can take the CO2 out of the sky, you can create a carbon-neutral oil refinery that you can put anywhere on the planet where there's sunshine, because the power mechanism being used here is photosynthesis. A radical way of harnessing the sun's energy to help us deal both with the energy conversion crisis and the climate crisis. This is part of the age we're going into. Now, think of the implications of just this technology. And I have a number of advisory roles, and one is for an institution of engineers in the UK, where we talk about this stuff seriously, about, we're not just, will it actually work? When will it work? What's the maximum energy threshold? All that kind of stuff. And we think within 20 years, this will be a commercially viable option. The problem will not be the technology. The problem will be a shortage of engineers to make this stuff. It'll be a problem in Europe. It won't be a problem in Japan, or in China. So think of the implications of this technology. First, you don't have to put up with stuff like this. British Petroleum raping our planet with their ridiculous, immoral, profit-seeking destruction of our biosphere. You don't get men like this creating situations like that. That saves quite a lot of money. The cost to the UK government, according to our own Treasury, over £9 billion. That's my own government's figure, so almost certainly understated. What did it cost the American economy? Well, let's turn to Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist. Just think for a moment if just 10% of that money had been spent on scientific research into new forms of fuel. We would not have needed to go to war. And the solar energy. So lots of pessimists say solar is this tiny thing, it'll never get anywhere. That's because they don't understand compound interest. This is what has been happening to solar costs. So the top line is adjusted for today's prices. So solar energy is reducing in cost between 5 and 6% per year, and the installed base is going up between 20 and 30% per year. And as it gets cheaper, the installed base gets bigger. In fact, last year, the installed base of photovoltaic solar energy went up 180% on this planet. Who tells us this? British Petroleum. Now take those two trends, and this puts us less than 30 years away from ubiquitous, cheap solar energy. So we're about to change our relationship with energy. And when we do that, because we do not have an energy crisis, we have an energy conversion crisis. So when we solve that problem, and we are going to in the next 20 years, everything about our economy changes, because all our economies are based on our access to energy and our manipulation of it. We're also going to change our relationship with matter. If you arrange atoms in one way, you will get coal. You know this, carbon atoms make coal. You also know, if you remember your high school chemistry, that exactly the same atoms, exactly the same carbon atoms can be arranged a different way to make a diamond. And if you want to take control of this process and arrange carbon atoms in a different way, you can get something called a carbon nanotube. And depending on how you arrange the atoms in that tube, it can have magical properties. It can be 50 times stronger than steel, so that one single hair's breadth of it will lift up your car. Arrange them another way, and they will transmit energy without any loss. It's so strong, in fact, that people are already thinking about building space elevators with this technique. A huge pipe that goes into the sky that you crawl up to get to orbit. And they're already testing this idea. And that's just carbon. That's just one element. Think about what we might do with lots of other elements in combination. I met some people recently who have decided to go and engineer a nanoparticle that mimics what platinum does in the catalytic converter. Rather than worry about peak platinum, they're just designing from the bottom up, in their garage, a nanoparticle that does the same. The computing power to do that is almost extraordinary, except they're buying it for $1 an hour off the internet. The world is changing very rapidly. The future is coming much quicker. You've probably started to hear quite a lot about 3D printing, the democratization of manufacture. This company might be one to watch. They might be the Apple of desktop manufacturing. This is the MakerBot. It's about $2,000. And remember, about 35 years ago, Apple kind of invented desktop publishing. They had a computer that came out with a few fonts and some color, I think, and lots of us started making really rubbish newsletters. Okay? Well, 3D printing is probably at that stage now. Think what happens in the next 35 years with that. I mean, it's not actually too hard to see where this is going, because we already have examples to refer to what happens when you lose control of the means of production and the means of distribution. The record industry did that. In 2000, their top 3 selling albums sold nearly 26 million copies in America. 10 years later, when the internet really got going, it sold less than 10 million. It's a 63% decimation of their market in one decade because they didn't understand democratization of technology. This is what's happened to newspaper print ad revenues in the US. For every $1 they find online, they lose 10 from their print newspapers. So think, for instance, what 3D printing does to the toy industry. These were actually made on the MakerBot. You can download designs for toys now off the internet and print them at home. I mean, why on earth, as a child, am I going to go to a toy store somewhere in town and try and convince my mum to pay $40 or $50 for some piece of crap made by Mattel in a box that I don't really want, when I can design, co-design, and co-evolve toys with my friends all around the world and have a choice of millions? It's just one of the industries that's going to change. Toys, okay, what about cars? Jay Leno, the chat show host, has a vintage car garage. And vintage car fans will know that it's quite hard to find the parts. So what his garage does now is they find a part from one car, they scan it in 3D, and then if you want one, they'll print one for you. So you can come back the next day and get a camshaft. I'm going to speak to a car manufacturer next week. When they saw that, they nearly shit themselves. Some people have even bigger ambitions. The open source ecology project is talking about this, the Global Village Construction Set. I'm just going to read you from my notes what they describe that as. It's a modular, DIY, low-cost, high-performance platform that allows for easy fabrication of 50 different industrial machines that it takes to build a small, sustainable civilization with modern comforts. And they're thinking they can do it quite cheaply. The orange line is the traditional cost of making these industrial machines, and the yellow line is what they think their costs will be. Southampton University in the UK has just printed this. It's a plane, small plane, but it's printed. What's interesting about this plane is that the fuselage is a geodesic dome. So this actually is a design that was invented for the Wellington bomber in World War II. Very expensive to make by traditional means. And the wings are Spitfire wings. They're elliptical Spitfire wings. Again, very expensive to make using traditional methods. And now, though, you can print them. So that fuselage, I think, is just 4 parts. And already people like Airbus are talking about the completely printed passenger airplane, which they think will be about 65% lighter than current aircraft. Think about what that does for fuel costs. How far do you think this can go? Imagine a world, for instance, where you can have a mobile phone that never runs out of energy because it's solar powered. And it can give you a blood test. And then depending on what that blood test tells you, you can download the design for a drug and print that drug at home. I said this to a pharmaceutical company last week. They laughed and said, well, that's all very good science fiction. I said, it's not science fiction. We can already do this with the phone. This is a blood test for diabetes. This man has just developed a printer that prints pharmaceuticals. What does it all mean? How will this change the definition of wealth, of value? How does capital move? Where does value reside? Does your business or your client's business make sense 10 years from now? Almost certainly not. So the digital revolution, which we hear so much about, really was the aperitif, before the main meal. Because matter and biology are going to become programmable in the way that data has been. And we saw what happened with the digital revolution. That was a big shift, but it's nothing compared to what's coming next. If you thought digital was a big deal, you better strap yourself in. Because the next stage of human evolution is upon us in our lifetimes. We are going to take control of our own biology, we're going to take control of matter, and we're going to take control of the biology of every other animal and plant on this planet, if we want to. Which is a bloody scary thought. In fact, it's terrifying. And most people's reaction is, we have to stop. We have to step back from technology. We're losing the essentially human. This is not what God ordered. Einstein said it very well. He said, it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. Einstein was wrong. Because you cannot hold on to what makes us human by fighting against the very thing that we do best as humans, which is evolve through culture and technology. Whether we like it or not, we are a species defined by our use of technology. There isn't a bunch of dogs in Antwerp right now listening to a doggy author talk about doggy futurism in a doggy conference hall. I don't think, anyway. If it is happening, tell me, because that would be incredibly cool. But the thing is, we all know in our hearts that this doesn't happen. There's always 2 laughs on that slide. So the thing that we often fear is a threat to our humanity, our march forward to culture and technology, isn't. It's a wholehearted expression of who we are. And once we understand that and accept that, then I think we can start to think about how do we steer ourselves and our society in a positive and fruitful direction. And you need to understand our human nature if you're going to take part in that. If you're going to engage well with the future and make it a good one for your children. And technology is all very well and good. I mean, I'm a fan of technology, but it's worse than nothing without good thinking. And yet so many of our corporations, our governments, our schools, our NGOs, our charities, they're still working on the assumptions of the Industrial Revolution. And that revolution is almost over. And what that means is that the belief systems we've built our society on are no longer relevant. And the failures in our government, our legal system, and our financial system, yes, part of it is incompetence. But really what's happening is there's a big shift going on underneath, and they don't know how to move with it. We've already seen this with the digital revolution. Amazon became the world's biggest bookseller. Apple became the world's biggest music retailer. PayPal was not invented on Wall Street. Skype was not invented by an existing telecommunications company. Too many companies think that they can deal with these challenges that are coming by installing a new IT system or having another reorganization. And what they need to do is wake up and see that their belief system about how and why their company exists is probably no longer relevant. I mean, when I walk into companies, and I'm often asked to help them be more ethical, more innovative, or whatever, I have a test. I say, hi, great, thanks for inviting me in. I'm very pleased to help you. How many rules can we break? And the answer to that question usually tells me where I'm starting from. Because rarely the CEO will say, as many as we need to, within the law. We won't break the law, but I'm happy to break rules. And if we have to lobby for the law to change, I'm happy to do that as well. More often, something like this happens. I say, how many rules can we break? And there's a little bit of an uneasy silence. And everybody looks at each other as if they're waiting for permission for something. And then their shoulders go down a little bit, as if something in them has slowly died. And then somebody, usually from human resources or legal, says something like this. Well, Mark, we've got this company manual. And we've spent an awful lot of time and a huge amount of money installing these processes and procedures and rules that we really think embody a spirit of creativity. So can we work with those? Recognize that? And my answer is no. You look ridiculous. It's like trying to run after Usain Bolt in slippers. You're going to look stupid, and your competitor will be a dot in the distance. With all this stuff that's coming, the programmability of matter, you need to take off your slippers, because the companies that don't will go out of business. You need to think about these values now, because we're shifting everything about society. Everything's a big conversation now, and underneath all the conversation today has been a conversation about values, about what we care about, what we value, authenticity. But also we should be thinking about sustainability, what it means to have a company. Because the world is going to change. And now more and more people are in this conversation about the future. And when you find more and more people get into the conversation, you find they talk about the things that join us all together. Compassion, humanity, justice, fairness. Because this change is going to come. Philosopher Mark Bedeau, I spoke to during the writing of the book, he said, change will come. You can either try to stop it from happening, you can ignore it, or you can try and influence it in a positive way. Well, you cannot stop it from happening. I hope I've convinced you of that. And ignoring it is simply irresponsible. And so there is only one game left in town, which is trying to change our societies in a positive direction. Because if you're not doing that, my question to you is, why on earth are you here? What is the point of you or your organization if you're not making the world better? But also, you can make a profit while making the world better. Ron Pink wrote this fabulous book called Drive, where he says more and more companies want some kind of transcendent purpose. Not just because it's, makes the place nice to work or you get better talent, Because if you don't have that, you start to find that companies start getting really lame. Because like my old boss, they've got a bunch of employees who suddenly realize they don't really care that much. So you get crappy products and crappy service. So the company has to be part of this conversation about where we're going. Which is why you guys are so very, very important. Because you are the professional storytellers of the world. And how we tell the story of our future will influence the future we get. You are used to being the people in your organizations who are the kind of wacky, clever, creative ones. John Hegarty made that brilliant joke earlier about bringing in the creatives. Because they need you now. They need you really badly because you can sense it in the air that they're suffering. They don't know what to do. And people like you, people who know how to tell stories, to engage people, to grab my emotions, to take me on a journey, will be the very people they're going to need to take us into this new future. Nearly everything we do in the next 20 years is going to be about this big conversation about where the world is going as industrialism dies and the new age arrives. And so, there's the good, there's the bad, and the ugly. I'll start with the bad. Our organizations are no longer fit for purpose. Most of them, and we know that. This is not news. The good news is we have all these fabulous new tools to do something about it. But the ugly is that it's going to get very messy for the next 20 or 30 years. Philip this morning talked about how anarchy in China was actually the engine of renewal there. So you shouldn't really fear the messiness. You should embrace it. You should be excited about it. I mean, there's a Chinese curse, which is, may you live in interesting times. But I don't really see it as a curse. I mean, who doesn't want to live in interesting times? I mean, I don't want to live in boring times, do you? And I know some people do, but I don't. So I'm going to come to the end of my talk now with a story about a journalist. A journalist said to me, Mark, you're a futurologist. Tell us, what will the world look like in 50 years' time? And I said, I don't make predictions. Because if you look at the history of futurology and the history of predictions, you learn a lot about the personal wish list whoever was asked. I mean, there's a very sort of famous equation in futurology circles, which is futurologists will always predict that rejuvenation and immortality technology will arrive at just about the time they hit 70. So if they're 50 and you ask them, they go, oh, I think it's about 20 years from now. If they're 69, like, I think it's really just around the corner. Any second now, the whole rejuvenation thing is going to work. We are terrible at predicting the future. I mean, look at some of these famous quotes. Man will not fly for 50 years. That's from Wilbur Wright. That's the man who invented the airplane. Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? This is from a man at Warner Brothers Studios, okay? This is the industry you would think should be able to predict this stuff. This is the classic, of course. I think there's a world for making 5 computers. This man worked at IBM! So if they can't get it right, God knows how the rest of us are going to do it. We're quite good if we're professionals at predicting first-order effects. So if you get the internet and you think, okay, maybe email. I can see email, a network, one place, another place. I can send a message. Okay. But did we predict social media? Did we predict the role of social media in changing regimes in the Middle East? No. So making predictions is a really, really dodgy business. So I said to this journalist, I don't make predictions for those reasons. But I will tell you this. The future we have will be defined by the values that we choose. And it may be possible, may just be possible, that as we solve the energy crisis, as the world becomes more democratized, the values we choose can be more about what we're prepared to dream than about the constraints we've faced in the past. But if those values are not ones of authenticity, sustainability, compassion, humanity, and justice, then we had all better be prepared for the consequences. So we must think, what can we do to live those values? What are you going to do in your company, in your family, in your community? How are we going to live those values, make those values real? Because there are companies and organizations that do that, and we like them. I mean, I just so want to drink one of his beers right now. Because this man looks like a man who gives a shit. And he has 3 daughters, so he's fertile too, so that's, you know, that's optimistic. But his beer's authentic. I bet, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that he thinks about sustainability. And I bet you think that too. And he thinks about localism and supporting local economies. So how are your companies going to embrace the values that actually all of us hold dear? We all care about the same stuff, and yet our companies tell us that we shouldn't think about them in the boardroom. That is no longer a tenable position as we move into this new age, because nobody's going to thank you for it. We have to get this change in the right direction, which means you people in this room, will no longer be the storytellers of the industrial age. You must become the story makers of our new age. And in fact, I would suggest that the survival of optimism does in fact depend upon it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark Stevenson. Please be seated. To be honest, I'm a bit speechless. Wow. Okay. Then let's start with the people here. Zijn er vragen? Are there questions for Mark Stevenson or for Johan van Dijk?
They're all leaving, look.
Yeah, but they are going to buy a 3D printer.
Yeah, they
for Christmas.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's send to Twitter then.
Well, there's a question.
Ah, sorry. Okay.
Seriously, the entire future, and you don't have a single question.
I think it was symptomatic for your talk, that the silence and the energy in the room was incredible. And I can only congratulate you, but because this was also transcendence in the room. And I think in our society, in our world, transcendence has to be also honored. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pedro.
You know, can I ask you a geek question?
I don't know, how geeky is it?
Oh, it's really, really geeky.
Okay, well, okay, we'll try.
You know, there's always a question, where's the loo in the USS Enterprise in Star Trek?
Yeah.
Where's the loo in your story? Because quite often, if you see a movie about the future, well, it looks very, very, very bright. You said, okay, it will be messy, but afterwards it will be bright. Where's the loo?
Actually, I disagree with you almost entirely.
Okay.
In that, if you actually look at most science...
There's the loo.
There's the loo. If you look at most science fiction, in fact, most of it's quite dark. Mm-hmm. This is why James Cameron has a job. I mean, if he had made movies where everything just was great, we wouldn't go, would we? It would be boring. I mean, the future is a fiction, and when we create fictions, and I write, I'm a playwright as well, so I write comedy and fiction in the UK, and you must create, a conflict. And so it's not surprising that so many of our dreams of the future are so dark, because when we imagine fictions, we don't imagine everybody getting on. There's a very famous story about Isaac Asimov, who famously came up with the 3 laws of robotics. And when he first wrote his first story about robotics, in it, all the robots just kind of worked, and everybody got along well. And he took it to the editor of the magazine that he was giving it to, and the editor went, Isaac, this is rubbish. Go away and rewrite it. And so he went back and came up with those famous 3 laws of robotics to satisfy the 3 laws of fiction, which are there must be conflict, there must be conflict, and there must be conflict. And so actually, if you look at science fiction, it's very rare that you have a Wall-E, as a nice robot. And even when we do have Wall-E, he's in some dystopian, destroyed future, So I don't think that we do see the future as bright, and that's part of the problem. And the problem for the human condition is one of walking this very delicate line between fearing the future, which makes a lot of sense, because you want to make sure you've got it still there. We're always scared somebody's going to take it away from us. So we fear the future, but we're also the only creature to invent it. And therefore, often our media and our politics is governed by fear because that's the thing we see first. And so I've got less upset over time about the media and politicians with giving us fear-based messages because it makes sense. You know, as you walked into this room, you checked for fire and lions, whether you knew it or not. And if there had been a fire in here, you wouldn't be sitting here listening to this conference. You'd have headed out. So we always see the fear first. But actually the great thing is that, you know, human beings make the future. And then one of the solutions to this is to stop thinking like a politician and start thinking like an engineer. Because when politicians see each other, they go, oh, bollocks. Oh, no. There's another politician. How is this going to work? Will they help me? Will they hinder me? I don't know. Engineers meet each other and they go, great! You can help me with my problem. So we have to, I mean, that's what you had, right? You know, you're like, you found some people who would help you. You didn't go out and think, what I really need for my company now is a politician. You thought, I need some engineers. I need some beer engineers and some company engineers, and we're going to make this thing incredible. So this is, you know, that's the thing, you know. So that's my job, is to try and convince people to get into engineering and not politics. Yeah,
you're a real optimist. You're a real one too. I mean, so many Twitters saying, I like this. This is optimistic. I like this. This is optimistic. So nice. Nice to have them at all. At last, yeah. I wanted to say.
I want to mention just one thing. The most tweeted question we got on Twitter today was this one.
Where can I get?
Where can we get safe beer now?
Yeah.
Ja, helaas, ook hier is het een evenement met exclusiviteit, dus ik vrees dat het... Gezien wat ik heb verteld is uit het leven gegrepen. Maar in het Petercafé in uw buurt.
Now, if we talk about safe beer, it's the third story today that we hear talking about a marketing budget that's close to zero. Is that pessimistic for the sector of marketing? Because if there's nothing to give for marketing, where do we need these people from?
I think even for us as a very small company, it's very clear that we need marketing. If people do not know you exist, you will not survive. And you have to work with the means you have. Once we grow, we will, I'm not sure if we will ever do mass marketing, but things evolve and we'll work with the means we need. So it's out of necessity that we don't do any big campaigns, but also it's what we are. And I think the best marketing, whether it's with a big budget or a small budget, is when you believe in what you stand for and you just tell people what you stand for, show them whatever you make or sell. And I think that's, in any form, always the best marketing there is.
Okay. Do you tell something about it in your book, about marketing, how it will be in, let's say, 20 years?
Well, the thing I worry about is when we talk about, you know, marketing and manufacturing and sales and you know, childcare and whatever, and as separate things. You know, you're not just a marketer. The trouble with the Industrial Revolution is it tells you can only do one job. And you must train to do that job, and you must very much concentrate to do that job. And for God's sake, don't make any mistakes. And if you make no mistakes, as John said earlier, you'll get promoted. It's actually really dull. And actually, you're not just a marketeer. You're a parent, and you're also an entrepreneur. You know, and so if you think only about marketing, then you're not really thinking about the whole thing. And there's that really sort of horrible business maxim that you must think outside the box. I hear that all the time. It's like, no, you must get outside the box. You must go to new places, see new things. Too many people work in jobs where they see the same 5 people every day. They talk to the same 5 suppliers. They have the same 5 ideas with different flavors every year. Okay? If you really want to be a marketeer, you have to be a citizen of the world. And the great marketeers, as we know, are like you. I mean, the best marketing I've seen all day is you. Like, because I want to buy your beer. You know? Because why? Why is he such a great marketeer? Because he's not standing here saying, I work in marketing. You're standing here saying, I'm a citizen of the world and I decided to make this beer to make the world a little bit cooler. You know, and I want your beer. So you're not a marketeer, and don't let anybody tell you you're a marketeer. The Industrial Revolution and too many corporations will put you in a box and say, that's your job. And you have to say, no, that's not my job. My job is to make the world a better place, and if you won't help me, I'll work somewhere else or form a company that will.
All right. Now, Let me thank you, Mark Stevenson, Johan van Dijk, and Pedro de Bruikere. Thank you for being with me today. Thank you. Wow.